Welcome to FMH InsureCast, a podcast created by Farmers Mutual Hail designed to deliver expertise and insights from trusted FMH team members and industry experts. Each new episode will dive into new products, industry updates, and innovative solutions. Let's get to today's topic.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FMH InsureCast. I'm Dave DeCap, and today I've got two, not just one, but two special guests joining me from the great state of Wisconsin. Fun fact, I actually lived there for 2 years. I'll talk to them about it. I think I was northeast of where they're at. But before I introduce them, two things I'm particularly excited about learning today and getting out of our discussion. First, in education. Cranberry is such an important crop. A lot of people don't know about it, maybe even people that are listening. So I'm really looking forward to education from these ladies. And at the same time, they've had very interesting personal experience. So interesting challenges coming up through the business. So I really want to dive into that a little bit, and because I think it's pretty inspiring. So first, I'll introduce Jenna Van Wychen. Jenna, in addition to being a crop insurance agent, full disclosure, is on FMH's Agent Advisory Council. So we're happy to have her as part of that group. Jenna lives with her husband, a fourth-generation cranberry farmer on his family marsh, Wetherby Cranberry Company. And I'd also like to introduce Amber Bristow. Amber's a fifth generational, so she's also a generational farmer. And on her family's marsh, Russell Resin and Son. And fun fact about Amber, she's a podcast host herself. So we may have to turn the tables a little bit here, and maybe Amber can give me some pointers, right? And they're both in Warrens, Wisconsin, kind of right there, central in the state. And I'd just like to welcome you ladies to the FMH InsureCast.
Thanks, Dave. Good morning.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, super happy to have you guys. Can we just get started? I did a kind of a brief intro, but can we get started maybe with Jenna and talk a little bit more about yourself, maybe a little bit more in detail, a little bit more about your background?
Sure. Well, today I'm certainly in all aspects of my life in agriculture, but I started out never thinking I'd ever be here. I was a hospitality and tourism major and spent 10 years in a totally different sector in private country clubs. And at age 30, my dad had an agency, crop insurance agency, and he offered me to come back and work with him. And I think I'm going on year 13, and it's just a joy. I can't believe some days I get to do what I do and work with farmers and get involved. And the added bonus is that I met a cranberry grower himself, and we live on his family's farm. We're raising our two kids and heavily immersed in that. I get to live next to great people like Amber and in a wonderful community. And yeah, I'll talk more a little bit about my involvement in the cranberry industry, but that's a little bit about me.
We've got a number of fun facts. So you guys are neighbors, both involved with generational farms, work together, talk to each other all the time. That's fantastic. Moving over to Amber. Amber, can you kind of do the same? Give us a little bit of background about yourself, maybe plug your podcast.
Sure. So like you mentioned, I am fifth generation out on my family's cranberry marsh in Warrens. Everything is run through my mom's side of the family. So my dad married into the family business and learned everything that he knows about growing cranberries through my grandfather. And same with my husband. He didn't have any prior farm knowledge until he met me. And now he's learning everything through my dad. So everything on our farm is passed down generation to generation just by watching and learning. And same with me. When I was growing up, I was pulling weeds in high school. That was my summer job. And I think that was my parents' way of building my character. It's definitely not a fun job. And so when it came time for college, I said, heck with this. And I went to school for sports management. And I ended up working in baseball where I met my husband. And we are back on the farm now. And we have a 3-year-old son, Porter, who's the start of the 6th generation, and adding to our family later in the spring. So we're a very hands-on family operation, and we live very close to each other. I have my parents in my backyard, and my grandma is right across the driveway, and Jenna is right across the pond from us. So we're all a very tight-knit community out here, and we love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Particularly the generational aspect of it. I mean, a lot of a number of farms. I shouldn't say a lot because it's different depending on where you are in the country. But a number of farms are generational. But when you're talking about cranberries, I think when we were talking earlier, it is a very generational, sometimes six, seven, generations. I mean, FMH is six generations now running the company. So the parallels there are fantastic. I really like it.
Yeah, and I think if you ever set foot on a Cranberry Marsh, you'll see why so many generations want to keep coming back. You take a look at our landscape and our environment out here. It's just so beautiful and so unique and different from a lot of other agriculture. And you just, even when you leave, you just have this strong pull to come back home and be around it even longer. So it's really a one of a kind experience being out here.
Yeah. I think one of the cool things that people don't um, realize, unlike corn and beans, cranberries are perennial, and we don't rent our land like row crops traditionally do. So the people that own the marshes typically are the ones working them. And as a perennial, some of our vines are 30 years old on these marshes. So it's we're planting and renovating all the time, and that's a different topic. But there's definitely a legacy here and a lifetime commitment. My husband, when I met him, one of the first things I noticed was how passionate he was about what he does. And when I met him to convince me to move to a town of 350 people, he said, I was born here and I'm going to be here the rest of my life. So you got to be okay with that if we're going to have a life together. And I pretty quickly fell in love with it. So
That's awesome. And by the way, perfect segue into the next kind of area of discussion I wanted to get into, that education piece, right? The kind of level set, because I want to get into your guys' experience in the industry too, and your roles and some of the many hats you wear. But if we could level set first, and whoever wants to do this, or we can tag team it. But can you talk about, like you mentioned perennial, the cranberries are perennial, so you have some 30-year-old vines even. And can you talk a little bit about just the growing cycle?
Sure. What would be a good time of year to start, Jenna? It's always a hard, a hard time to pick because it's a perennial. Everything's happening all the time. So
I
maybe,
always start at this time of year, December, and walk us through harvest. Walk us to
okay.
harvest. Yeah.
Okay. So after harvest, once the fruit is picked off of the vines themselves go dormant. So they just kind of shut down their growing for the entire winter when it starts to get really cold. So while they're growing, the vines are really lush and green. And when they start to go dormant, the leaves and the vines themselves turn a really like a maroon color, like a very dark cranberry color. They'll stay that way until it starts to warm up again in the spring. So in order to protect those vines over the cold winters that we have, we will flood our cranberry beds. So when I talk about a cranberry bed, we should probably start there.
Yeah.
We're referring to like the plots that they're grown in. So every cranberry bed is surrounded by a ditch and they're dug down into the ground. So the roots are closer to our groundwater. Because we are in a marshy area, we have a very high level of our groundwater. So to dig down into the ground, that just keeps the roots of the vines just damp all the time. So when we flood, like we do similarly for harvest process, cranberries aren't grown in water, but we do use water throughout the entire year to maintain the health of the vine. So we'll flood these vines up until all the vine tips are covered underwater, and we'll let that water sit there during a cold snap. Like right now, we're in a very cold, windy snap of weather, which I guess it's time for.
Right.
We let that water sit until it freezes. Usually about 10 days, we let that water sit until it freezes into a thick layer of ice. And then we'll pull any remaining water off and flush it back, recycle it back to where we pulled it from. So we have a lot of reservoirs throughout our property that we use for irrigation and for this flooding process. We'll do this process a couple of times during the winter. Anytime we have a cold snap, we'll just reflood and build up that layer of ice until we usually aim for about 14 inches of ice to last us through the winter. Once we have that ice built up, we do this process called sanding, where we'll load up our dump trucks full of the sand that the cranberry vines grow in. And then we'll drive those dump trucks on top of the frozen beds and spread a thin layer of sand on top of the ice, usually about a 1/4 inch thick. And then in the springtime, when all that ice melts, that sand will filter through the ice, filter through the vines, and it will push down. The cranberry vines themselves are a long running vine. So it'll push down any of those runners and it will cause new growth. within the vines. And it also acts as an insect control too. It'll suffocate any insect eggs that might have survived the winter. It kind of suffocates them in the spring. So we don't have an insect hatch right away in the spring. So it's kind of a double whammy process. Also during the winter, we're working on a lot of repairs with our equipment, updating, like changing oils, servicing our equipment, things like that. So winter is one of our busiest times of year, surprisingly, even though there's not a lot of growing going on. It's a lot of maintenance for the growing season.
So did I hear you right that so you do this add water, ice, sand layer multiple times over the winter, or do you do it once and then it's because it sounded like you said multiple times. So
Yep,
you go through
we'll do
cold
this
snaps.
multiple times. Yeah. And every time we're just building up that layer of ice because, in Wisconsin, you don't know what the winters are going to be like
Right.
anymore. So it's going to be 40 degrees by the end of the week. So we're going to lose some of that ice. And we always want to have that built up layer just to protect the vines from poking out. They might get exposed to wind damage, and then that would cause the buds that are already developed for next year's crop to burn off and not survive until the spring when they come out of dormancy. So it's really important that we have that ice layer built on just in case we get any extreme temperature snaps. So then in the spring, when all that ice melts, that's when the vines will start coming out of dormancy. Usually when we get kind of into the 60s and 70s, usually for about a week at a time, that's when those vines start to wake up and the growing process begins. So once we start noticing that the vines are coming out of dormancy, we need to get our irrigation systems set up because we use irrigation. That running water helps keep the vines protected from frost overnight and into the early morning hours. So that running water keeps the frost from sticking to the plants and those buds and killing them off. So it's important that we have running irrigation as soon as possible. So that's like a mad dash for growers throughout the area. That's when like the long nights and early morning hours really start for us. And then kind of in the spring, that's when we start heading into our planting season as well. So because the cranberry plants are perennial, we don't have to replant every year, but we do renovate typically around like 5 acres, I think. 5 to 7 acres a year is pretty typical for growers in this area to renovate. And that all entails starting with a fresh layer of sand. And we either do cranberries are a self-propagating plant. So we have different varieties scattered throughout our property, depending on hybrids. And there's so many different varieties of cranberries, but they all basically taste and look the same. There's not a huge difference to the untrained eye, I guess. But if we have a variety that we really like and want to continue to grow, we will mow down an existing bed down to just little tiny stubs, and then we'll run a hay baler over top of those vine trimmings and get the cranberry vines into like a hay bale size. Keep those under running water until we're ready to plant. And when we are ready to plant, we'll have our drain tile lined. If there's any irrigation, underground irrigation, we'll get that hooked up and make sure that's all working. And then we'll take those vine trimmings, and every marsh does it completely different. So this is just from our marsh experience. What we do is we'll break up those hay bales of vines and put them into the back of like a manure spreader that just shoots the vines down straight to the ground. And then we'll just go through and we'll kind of fluff them out so there's no big clumps. Then we'll disc those vines in, get irrigation going on them, fertilize them, and then they'll continue to grow from just those clippings. And it'll take about 2 to 3 years for those vines to mature enough to get a sizable crop off of. And same for the bed that we had mowed down. So just from those little stubs, they'll continue to grow. And again, in about 2 or 3 years, we'll get a sizable crop that we can harvest off of. So that's why we don't harvest, or that we don't renovate a lot in a given year, just because it's such a long process to regenerate, recoup and get those vines back to a healthy level. And then summer, that's kind of our slower season. We're just kind of sitting back and watching everything grow and keeping an eye out for weather, keeping those vines watered with, again, irrigation, keeping an eye out for insects and pests with our integrated pest management team. They come out and check for bugs and other diseases that might pop up, and controlling those as soon as we can. And then we head into our harvest season, September, usually through the end of October. And all of our fruit goes in for processing. And Jenna, you could probably talk about the fresh fruit harvest and how that's a little bit different. But as far as for processing, we'll start the flooding process up. So when we have about 6 to 8 inches of water on top of those vines, we'll come in with a harrow tractor. And this is unique to the cranberry industry. There's just a small tractor with tracks. And then on the front and on the back, there are metal fingers called rakes. And once we get that tractor in the water, that water kind of acts as a cushion between the tracks and the vines. So it's a little bit more gentle for this tractor to drive through. And those rakes will just comb the berries right off of the vines. Because the cranberries have 4 air pockets inside, they have little hollow chambers. That's what allows the cranberries to float to the surface of the water. So once all of those berries are combed off the vines, that's when we add our big flood. That's so we have about 24 inches of water total just to get those cranberries up out of the vines. We corral them together, and then we bring in our berry pump, which again is unique to the industry. It's essentially a giant vacuum that kind of cleans the fruit out in the water, sucks them up simultaneously on top of this giant platform. And then that platform will shoot the cranberries into the back of a semi-trailer, and it also will pull any leaves or sticks and separate them from the fruit. And then the leaves and the sticks will get into a dump truck, and then we use that as kind of compost in a giant empty field that we can recirculate. So everything gets reused, recycled. The water will go back to where we pulled it from. And then it typically takes about 48 hours from the time we start our harvest until the time that the fruit is loaded into the coolers, for us anyway, at Ocean Spray, to be processed later on into juices and sauce and things like that. So again, that process takes from September all the way until the end of October. So it's usually about a 6-week chunk of time for us to start to finish. Jenna, do you want to talk about how your fresh fruit harvest is a little bit different than that?
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think this is a really cool fact that only 5% of the cranberries grown in the world are used for fresh fruit. And by fresh fruit, I mean the fruit everybody sees in the grocery store that hopefully they picked up in the last couple of weeks and
Right.
bought a few extra bags to freeze for the winter. 100 years ago on these marshes, everybody really was a fresh fruit grower because we didn't have new products like we do today. But our marsh, after about 120 plus years later, is still definitely integrated in fresh fruit. We think it's important. It's a part of our heritage. And so we are part of that 5% that harvest our fruit for fresh. We have our own cleaning facility on site and our packing house that we pack in either 12-ounce or 1-pound packages. We also sell to the public throughout the United States. We ship for about 6 weeks in the fall as well to consumers. And so, but the bulk of our fruit goes to grocery store chains and things of that nature. So that's a very labor intensive
My goodness.
process, I would say. But,
Yeah.
we have a really big family. There's about 23 of us, and it's all hands on deck in the fall.
So just a clarifying question. So is all 5% come from Wisconsin you said 5% of the fresh fruit, or
No, I think
5%
that,
of it is fresh?
I think,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, Amber, but I think that's a national statistic. So a lot of fresh fruit comes from Wisconsin. So, um, Wisconsin actually produces about 60% of the world's production of cranberries. So we definitely support a lot of that 5% of fresh.
Yeah.
But, there's definitely other growing regions on the West Coast and the East Coast that also provide fresh fruit as well.
Mm.
But the majority of fruit today is going for processed products, like Amber said, juice, sweetened dried cranberries, sauces, bakery items, things of that nature. So.
And I think that number is so low too, Jenna, just because it's so hard for grocery stores to keep fresh cranberries any longer than, just a seasonal item, because
Yeah.
they're so hard to store and keep the integrity of that firmness of the berry, that you can't really freeze them, thaw them. And that
Okay.
supermarket needs to have like a large freezer facility if they're going to have fresh cranberries. So if you do find cranberries in the store, buy them in bulk, buy up on them now, throw them in your freezer. They will last, up till next season when you can find them again. Just don't take them out, thaw them, throw them back in. So they'll last in your freezer wonderfully until next fall. So don't be bummed. Just buy them in bulk while you can get them and keep them on hand.
We have a lot of customers that come to us every year and they buy 30 pounds at a time because they put them in their smoothies and make muffins so it's really cool to hear how people utilize cranberries.
Yeah, no kidding. The uses are unlimited. It's
Mhm.
amazing. And thanks for that detailed explanation because every question I had along the way, Amber and Jenna, both of you guys, when we were talking through it, you answered it and you answered it really, really well because that was a great description of the cycle. And maybe this is a question for Jenna. So switching to risk management, where a couple questions around that, but like when do you see them most susceptible, throughout the growing season? When do you, I know hail is a major peril that can be there, but when are they most susceptible and when are you talking to your other growers, your insureds about certain risks that may be there?
Yeah, Dave, hail is definitely one of the number one risk perils that we see. We are not immune to that in the state of Wisconsin here at all. In fact, and the weather is changing, right? So we used to see a lot more hail events in the late summer, but we have definitely transitioned to seeing more hail events in the springtime. And that's very delicate too, because those vines are coming out of dormancy. They have those small buds, those buds create fruit. So we're very focused, I will say, from about April 1st to definitely when that fruit crop is out of the beds. Mother Nature, I can't take the credit for this, but there's a grower on the East Coast that said once, Mother Nature is our boss and she is non-negotiable. And so we are, you know, and I love my dairy farmers immensely. And everybody says, oh gosh, as Amber just denoted, we don't kick back our heels in the winter months. It's a very focused annual cycle. I will say we're always on, we're always watching the weather and the temperatures. So there's risk all the time, right? Last year on Valentine's Day, the state of Wisconsin, most of our cranberry growing regions didn't have ice anymore. We
Mm,
were all very nervous about that.
I
Now,
bet. Yeah.
fortunately, Wisconsin still produced a great crop this year, but many people were concerned about the winter damage on these vines and how that was going to affect yields. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we are definitely on our toes with the changing weather these days.
Yeah, and obviously busy and engaged constantly with your insureds, making sure that they have the right protection they need, engaged with your personal marshes. So I think that's another good segue into the roles both of you play, uh, meaning in and around the industry, right? So we talked about Jenna being a crop insurance agent, Amber big into education with podcasts and social influence, right? But can you talk about your roles and maybe other associations that you work with, and just what it's like in and around the entire industry?
Sure. I'll give you a break, Jenna. So growing up, I was really watching my dad and seeing how actively involved he was in the entire community and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. He was president of the board for a few years and just always involved in a lot of different organizations involving the cranberry industry. So I was very fortunate to be exposed to that at an early age and know what was going on, kind of since I could understand what was going on. So I'm kind of taking over him for those different communities, I guess. So I'm actually involved in the Wisconsin Cranberry Board, and that organization helps get funding to bring in research for cranberry growers in the state of Wisconsin. And we kind of delegate what research is happening that year. And we have a really close relationship with the UW Extension program here in the state. And it's a really hands-on growers working with researchers to better the entire state and better the entire industry. And that's a really cool project to be a part of. Also, I'm very involved in the public relations committee for the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. just to get the name of Wisconsin Cranberries out to more than just the growers, and being involved in events like the Wisconsin State Fair, different. I know they're involved with like the women's volleyball teams in Wisconsin and the hockey teams, and handing out fruit samples and all these different events. So it's really fun to get the name of Wisconsin Cranberries out there. And right before COVID hit, I started a social media page called Cranberry Chats on Instagram, where I just showed the world what it was like in a day in the life of a cranberry grower, and show kind of behind the scenes on a day-to-day activity, what we were doing on our farm. And people were very interested in that. I found a really great community through the women in agriculture, especially. It was really interesting because as cranberry growers, you don't really see this as anything that special and unique. But to me, finding farmers that were dairy farmers or row crop farmers, I thought that was so interesting, just because it was so different and from what we're doing, and seeing the equipment that different folks are using compared to what we're using, and vice versa. It was just a really cool way to learn more about agriculture as a whole through social media. And I feel like that's a very millennial type thing to say, but it's it's a great way to connect with people and learn different stories. And through that, I met a dairy farmer from Southwest Wisconsin that I kind of had a really great connection with. And we started a podcast together called Forward Farming. And the name behind that it just kind of came to me one day because the state motto of Wisconsin is forward, where women in agriculture moving, the agriculture industry forward, and just sharing all of Wisconsin agriculture, especially our specialty crops that don't get as much recognition, and bringing guests on. Like we had a ginseng farmer on, we've had goat farmers on, we've had like all of these unique industries that you might not think of when you think of Wisconsin agriculture. And just sharing that with different people has been a really amazing educational experience I think for the both of us and our listeners. We get a lot of great feedback when we have those specialty farmers on as guests, and it's a really cool thing that all started from just sharing videos on my phone. So I love it. It's a really fun way to connect with people and share my love of cranberries with other people. And now sharing recipes and kind of showing how my son and I, take on the industry together. And I'm not as involved in the farm as I was before I had my son. Now I'm more of a stay-at-home mom with him, but still trying to get him involved and keep me involved on the farm operations as much as I can. And it's a really fun dynamic. It's a real big change for everybody, but it's something that we're navigating and finding our own little place out here.
Yeah, the balance to me is very amazing, right? You're balancing the family life with being involved, pushing women in the industry forward, and then just being involved on the social aspect, getting more other agricultural industries involved through their podcast and that. So that's very, very interesting and amazing. The balance to me is amazing because there's a lot.
There's a lot to go. There's a lot going on.
Right, exactly. And then Jenna, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I will say Amber is just someone I admire deeply, and a super big leader and spokesperson for this industry. So it's just a highlight for me to work next to and live next to all these great people. So I married into a family that was very engaged in this industry as well. My mother, still at 75 years old, does a ton of tours and opens our farm up to the public because she just feels it's super important to share our story and teach people about cranberries. So, and I think I've also had the gift of gab a little bit in my life. And so it did not take long for me to be encouraged to run for the grower or for the Wisconsin State Growers Association. And I'm in my 8th year, and I'm currently serving as the president of the board. We're going through a very exciting, very big transition right now. We just recently hired our second ever executive director after the previous one served 35 years in his role.
Oh, wow.
So we are all learning, we're collaborating. I have a smile on my face because I think the camaraderie and the engagement of our community is one of the best things about us. Everybody is willing to help. Everybody's willing to chip in. I'm just constantly humbled by the volunteerism and care about this industry that cranberry growers have in Wisconsin. So that takes up quite a bit of time right now, but I feel it important as a service because I not only work with farmers in my daily role, and we work with a lot of cranberry growers in our agency, but I live amongst them and I love some of them. So I think it's what it's teaching me is that we have to get involved. We have to educate people. We have to stand up for um, the land and the practices that we feel so passionately about because it's important. Food is important, and farming is definitely something we need in this world forever.
Absolutely. More so than ever, right? The education, the awareness, the outreach is more important than ever. It's
Yeah.
but so yeah, so your effort just to be applauded and to be thanked and to have a lot of gratitude about just the efforts that you both are making.
Yeah.
The one thing I wanted to and we talked a little bit about this too is the aspect of moving women forward in agriculture, making sure the voices are heard, the opportunities are there, that type of thing. For the folks listening that maybe want to take more of a role in their particular industry, do you have any advice or words of wisdom, or is it just roll up your sleeves and do what you can? It's probably
You know,
all
you
of that,
know,
right?
Bit of both.
Yeah.
all of that, Dave. Yes, I think that's all pertinent information. I was very skeptical to get involved in the Cranberry Association, especially since I did not grow up on a cranberry farm. But I think it's been the best thing for me. I would encourage anybody to do this. I think everybody, especially in agriculture, not just cranberries, in dairy, in row crops, in canning crops. I think everybody's just very welcoming to anybody willing to sit at the table and do the work and share in the common goal. So get involved. I had a lot of cheerleaders that encouraged me, and I'm so very grateful to them today because I've grown as a person, and I hope I'm going to leave things a little better when I depart my term here.
That first step, right? Getting involved. Sometimes it's hard to kind of, rip the can open and jump into that activity. But once you get in, it sounds like that you start to love it. You start to, really enjoy what you're doing and know that the impact that you're having. Uh, so yeah, I think I mentioned at the beginning, inspiring. I mean, it's just fun to talk to you guys about this. And obviously you can tell you're very, very passionate about what you do, about all the roles and the hats that you wear. But is there anything else that comes to mind that maybe we haven't covered? Anything that another topic or another thing to talk about as far as what you'd like to get out there a little bit more to the world?
Yeah, and kind of touching back on folks getting involved, I think now more than ever, people are very conscious of the food that they're eating, especially nutrition wise. So if you're kind of on the fence about sharing your farm story or just, food in general, I think it's always it's always so beneficial to have more voices out there, especially from the farmers, because what better source of knowledge to get your education on the food that you're eating than from the farmers
Right.
themselves. I mean, I always say ask a farmer, not Google. I mean, they're going to know, they're going to tell you what's actually going on. There's a lot of horror stories out there that, the media is pushing and half of it's not accurate.
Right.
So ask a farmer, don't ask Google. And kind of tying in the nutrition too. Cranberries are considered a true superfruit. There's so many nutritional benefits to a cranberry that there's no reason that you can't enjoy them all year round, and especially outside of the holidays. They're a staple for the holidays, but there's so many different ways that you can enjoy them throughout the entire year. I on my social media page, I kind of do this thing called Will It Cranberry, and I try to throw cranberries in recipes that aren't typically in favor of cranberries. And my favorite recipe that I've actually ever made was a cranberry tiramisu, and it was honestly like my
Holy cow.
husband still talks about it. He's not a big like sweets fan, but he every once in a while he'll be like, can you make that again? That was really good. So just trying to incorporate cranberries in so many different ways has been a really fun challenge. And I've never had a bad cranberry recipe.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna throw that out there. I've never had
Yeah.
a bad cranberry recipe, so try it. And if it doesn't work, what's the point? That's one meal out of, how many you eat in a
Right.
year. So just try it. You're gonna get more benefits than not from eating cranberries. So
And
again,
what do you call that? You call that Willet cranberry?
Willet, yeah,
Willet
I call it
cranberry.
Willet cran. Yeah. And I've tried
A
a lot
Willet
of
cran.
Willet cran. I've tried a lot of funky things and they've all been pretty good. So
They all turn out.
they all turn out
Yeah.
somehow.
That's all.
Yeah,
Yeah. Tiramisu. Yeah. Oh,
it's
go ahead, Jen.
it's a great video. I get a lot of inspiration from Amber.
It's kind of scary. I'm not the best in the kitchen, so I don't know why people take advice from me, but if it doesn't work, I'll let you know. And if it does, I'll let you know either way. So again,
Yeah.
no bad recipes yet.
You got to try it. You got to
Yeah.
try it. Yeah. No, I think cranberry. Again, we could talk all day long. I think the favorite part for me giving tours on our farm is talking about how to use cranberries and help people just explore new ideas. We have a lot of recipes. Pinterest is great. I think there's a lot of magazines now that highlight cranberries and a lot of things during the fall. So,
Oh, sure.
yeah, try it. I always say from sweet to savory,
Mhm.
there is a recipe to utilize the cranberries. So our family's favorite, I think, though, and Amber might agree, is that there's a cranberry cake with a hot butter sauce. And it is literally the easiest. You don't even need a mixer to make it, but we make it several times a year and it's always a hit. So
Very good.
Boy, I'm gonna have to
always
try
a
some of these.
hit.
This is
Yeah. We
fantastic.
love food. We love
Yeah.
cranberries, but we love food and cooking too. So
Yeah. And again, if you don't know a recipe, ask a farmer. Don't ask Google. Come straight to the
Yeah.
source.
Straight to the source because they've probably
I
got it, right? Yeah.
yes, I always say some of the best cookbooks ever were written by um farm people in communities, 4-H cookbooks, whatnot. You're going to find some goodness in those. So, yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. So anything else that comes to mind? I could talk about this all day. But we do have to make it a regular length podcast, right? Rather than a
I
4 or
know.
5 hour one.
I know. Anything on the women and egg front, Amber?
I can't think of anything. I
Not
mean,
to say.
if you guys are really interested in getting involved, I think a great place is the Farm Bureau. State Farm Bureau is a great place, even just to see what they have for resources. If you're struggling to find ways to get involved, they're a great place to go to for opportunities, volunteer events, different things like that, and they'll get you pointed in the right direction. Otherwise, just ask questions. I think that's kind of the biggest thing. Nobody's ever going to say no if you're asking questions and want to be involved more. I think everybody's looking for work, for help. So just stay curious, ask questions, and don't stop until you're satisfied. So just be curious and stay curious, I think is kind of the biggest thing.
Yeah, I think there's some great, definitely in our industry. I know we're two women here that are talking about cranberries, and that's a highlight today, but there's a lot of great conversations and I think progress being made at board tables, at committees, at engagement sessions for agriculture today that is making some serious movement because like Amber said, people aren't afraid of having the conversations, and I think we're allowing space for people to talk and express themselves. So I think that's all really positive when people come together and can be vulnerable enough to share and come together for a common goal and make something better. So I know, I'm just really proud of our industry where we're at today and the conversations from both sides of the table, men and women, and we're working hard and I've got a smile on my face and I mean it. I think we do.
No, excellent. And Amber, you mentioned reaching out maybe to Farm Bureau or reaching out to some of the associations. How could people get in touch with each of you as far as, I mean, Amber, if maybe let's start with you. And I think you mentioned it's Cranberry Chats on Instagram and then Forward Farming Podcast, right?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that
So I'm
correct?
pretty, I'm not as an active as I used to be. But yeah, you can find me on all social media platforms, even TikTok sometimes. Just search for Cranberry Chats. And then I also have a podcast called Forward Farming. You can find that anywhere that you listen to your favorite podcasts at, and you can watch videos on YouTube as well. So search for me any of those places, and you'll see my face pop up.
Awesome. And Jenna?
Um, I'm not on social media a ton, but I am on Facebook and Instagram. Our agency Vinevest has a website, and that's probably the easiest way to reach out to me.
Yeah. So if anyone wanted to come do one of those fantastic tours, that would be the
Oh,
way to get a hold of you.
yes, sorry, Dave, I forgot. Yeah, our Marsh website is Wetherby Cranberry, and gosh, how did this slip my mind? Yes, we do tours in the fall, and one fun thing I will mention is every year, the first Saturday of October, we host a public harvest day where people can come and it's held rain, shine, or snow. Yes, we've had all three, but that's Wisconsin weather. And so we show harvest in every stage on a Saturday, and you don't need reservations for this. And, we're harvesting and picking up a bed. And then we also have a cranberry bed floating with berries that you can put on a pair of hip boots. I think we have 50 or 60 pairs at the marsh now. And we let people get in those, get in the bed, and lots of people to take great photos. I think it's super special when families send us postcards or Christmas cards of their family photo in our cranberry bed at Christmas time. And it's definitely a picture of a lifetime. And
That's awesome.
that's one of the coolest days I think we offer in the fall. So Weatherby Cranberry, and you can get all the details on that.
Awesome. I think I might take you up on that one. I'd love to get
Yeah.
a photo in the cranberry bed.
Yes. You know a person. You know
Yeah,
two
that's right.
people. You know two people.
Got connections. All
Yeah.
right. Well, I'd really just like to very sincerely thank you both for joining me today on the FMH InsureCast. I learned a ton. I'm sure all of our listeners and viewers have learned a ton as well. And I just really want to thank you both for your time and efforts in the industry and the conversation here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having us on and for asking the questions because we love talking about it, obviously.
Awesome. Well, it was fun to listen and fun to kind of engage on a great subject. And I also want to thank our listeners and viewers. Make sure you check for our next InsureCast. Go on YouTube or any of the podcast subscription services. And we'll see you next time on FMH InsureCast. Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to FMH InsureCast. We appreciate you joining us today and would like to hear from you. If you have questions about today's topic or an idea to share for an upcoming podcast, you can contact us at fmhpodcast@fmh.com. Thanks for listening. This podcast is intended for information purposes only. See policy provisions, terms, and conditions for details. Products underwritten by Farmers Mutual Hail Insurance Company of Iowa and its affiliates, West Des Moines, Iowa. Farmers Mutual Hail is an equal opportunity provider.